My name is Ally Nolan. I am an artist and designer from County Carlow. We're here in the Orchard Craft Studio where I make my work and I teach craft classes.
My name is Helena McAteer. I live near Borris in County Carlow and I'm a lace maker. I've been making lace since 2016 when I went to my first workshop in Boris house. As a follow-up to that workshop, a number of us decided that we'd continue to meet and to perfect our skills in lace making. As a result of that, Borris Lace Makers were formed, and Borris Lace Makers are a community group and dedicated to the revival of Borris lace. And there's great enthusiasm locally and within the county and nationally and now internationally through the EU Craft Hub. So there's great enthusiasm for the revival of this unique lace.
And we're very grateful as artists and designers in the area that the lace makers have kept this tradition alive, because we really need that knowledge and that skill base. The Borris lace is quite technical, and we really relied on the expertise of the Borris lace makers, particularly throughout the project that we're going to discuss today, because we need that, the foundation of every skill is really important, and the lace makers are ensuring that the lace is always honoured, and that there's, even when we're maybe pushing the boundaries of the Borris lace a little bit more, but with what we're going to do today, that there's still integrity in the piece, and that it stays true to the tradition of Borris lace. So today we're going to be going through the steps of a project that Helena and I collaborated on alongside the Borris lace makers, another artist, Jules Michael, the Carlow Arts Office. This was part of the Creativity in Older Age programme, an initiative by Creative Ireland and the EU Craft Hub, where we wanted to bring the lace to a larger group of people who maybe wouldn't have been exposed to Borris lace before, and particularly during COVID-19, for groups that may be suffering from social isolation during COVID-19. And again, Borris lace is something that it's quite difficult to teach remotely, so we had to open up the project a little bit more, that it wasn't just about the Borris lace stitching, but that maybe that there was a few entry points into the project that people could draw, they could stitch, they could print or iron, and they could really just take the project to whatever stage they wanted to. And then there was always choice and option in what activities they chose to do. And then also they had the choice to try the Borris lace fine net stitch, which would kind of be the entry-level stitch, Helena.
It is, and it forms the basis of many of the other Borris lace stitches, because Borris lace, it's a simple enough technique, but I think the project worked really well because it brought in the history, the heritage and the designs of the lace, and it stayed very true to that. And you use the skills that people had already. I mean, I suppose if you're working with people over 65, a lot of those people would have learned sewing from a very young age, and a lot of them would be able to knit or crochet and embroider. So I think, I suppose anybody who took up the project would have an interest in craft and needlework anyway. But I think people were able to use the skills they had and bring that into the project, working with the Borris lace designs. And then you started to get a request from people that they wanted to actually learn the lace making. And as far as then we made the video, just teaching the basic fine net stitch. And just talking to people afterwards, they found the video really good.
Absolutely.
And I think the packs were so well designed in terms of everything was there, everything was self-explanatory. There was fantastic instructions in the kit, and they were beautifully presented. And I think that was one of the winning points of this project, is the beautiful packs which Ally and Jules designed. And my own mum actually took part in the project. She was in Borris Lodge nursing home at the time. And it was just coming out of lockdown, I remember, when this particular kit arrived, and we just had fun working on the kit together.
A lot of the Borris lace designs are actually based on nature and flowers and flora and fauna found in the Carlow countryside. So people were obviously a lot more aware of their surroundings during COVID-19, and then it could kind of make those connections like, oh, that design is, I have that in my garden and everything. So I think the personal connection and pride as well, that this was a really highly skilled craft, and that it had been an important cornerstone, particularly in Borris. During the famine times, that women learned this as a famine relief project.
But I think the whole heritage part of it, you know, is very important also. There are people who never make Borris lace. And as you said, there were people, you know, this was people from Carlow who probably would have heard about Borris lace, and many of them might have known, had ancestors who made Borris lace. Passing on the heritage is just as important as passing on the skills, and just getting people excited about Borris lace again and bringing it, making it relevant today.
And 100%, and I think getting anyone involved in a craft, that it can be a daunting task sometimes if they feel that they're not skilled, or that they haven't maybe done creative work, particularly as we said that this was aimed at people over 65. So we found that a lot of people maybe, like you said, Helena, would have done these kind of crafts and activities when they were younger, but haven't done it in a long time, and maybe even their dexterity wasn't the same. So we wanted to make this that it was accessible, and that it was a fun activity to do. So like it really was kind of a multi-phase project, because each month, you know, they were worked on this over 6 months really, and they did it in smaller scale, and then they we enlarged the design. So it's kind of building up to creating a big piece, which I think creating it in phases made the process a little bit less intimidating for people to engage in creative work. But we just want people in the area, and the Borris lace makers are particularly good with this, with bringing it into schools, bringing it to the local nursing home, that people are aware of this craft, and that's raising awareness around it is kind of has been a big push lately. For this tutorial, we're going to bring you through the stages of the Borris lace by post pack. We're going to start with the first step, which is the drawing pack, where we will be creating our own Borris lace designs. We're going to start with making our Borris lace design. This is the first stage in the process, and we'll be using our drawing kit. So we'll start by opening the kit, and in the kit we have a Borris lace notebook, and that contains some of the traditional Borris lace designs that participants can use to create their own design. We're starting off just having a look at what design could work. So we know we want to create a circular design, so we have to keep that in mind, Lena, when we're doing it. And also that Borris lace is a continuous line, so we're trying to look for maybe a design with good flow in it. What would you be looking for in a good Borris lace design, Helena?
I think, that continuous flow of the line, and the designs are based on nature. That one there now is very nice.
Yeah, that one works. So Helena, why is the tape thicker in this design than in the other designs?
As far as I know, at the height of the industry, there were various tapes available that had more variety than we have today. I mean, that has been a major problem at one stage for Borris lace makers, is sourcing the tape, because during COVID, the factory that manufactured the tape closed down. We had to investigate then how we were going to be able to source the tape. But at that time, they would have had various types of tape. And if you look at some in Borris House, they have some of the samples that they would have received from suppliers in England, and you can see some beautiful samples of different types of tape.
No, because I recognise that it is a bit thicker than the other tapes, but I think that could work really well for our design, because we want to show the printing, and we could maybe get a thicker line, and they could see their design afterwards. So that's still in keeping with the Borris lace,
very
even
much
if it's
so.
a thicker line. Okay, so we try that one then.
Yeah,
for
I
the
think
design.
that would work
perfect.
really well.
So the first thing we'll do then is we'll grab some of the tracing paper from the kit. And again, we're just trying to make it very simple for people, so that if they feel they can't draw, they can freehand this if they'd like to as well, but just in case, if they just maybe want to get a nice steady design, because as we said, it's a continuous line, so it kind of has to be done in all one movement. So I'm just going to grab some of my pins and paper clips, and what we might do is just clip it to the notebook to keep it steady while we're drawing it. So again, I'm going to start at a center point, because usually it kind of looks like the tape is kind of in a loop there. So you might start and go to the left.
That'd be a good point there.
I'm left-handed, so try to keep your hand away from the design, because if you're drawing quite fast, it can smudge the design like that one there, but we can go back in the end.
Very well.
So again, you kind of have a basic design, and then, as I said, if there is little places where you felt your design went off a little bit, you can just kind of go back and thicken them up. Just from your own design point of view, if there's anywhere you'd like to thicken, or if you'd like maybe a little bit more shadow or something like that. We are going to be doing some of the stitches, but even if you'd like to draw in some of your stitches, that they can be quite nice as well. And try get in as much stitches. So Helena will be explaining the stitch styles a little bit later, but it's nice to have a little bit of variety in them as well, that you're getting in some of the stitches, because we'll be focusing on the fine net stitch, so some of the more complicated stitches we mightn't be making today, so you'll still have them represented in your design through your drawings.
I look the way everything a person needs is in this kit.
So we're going to go to the back page, and we're just going to put it on the blank sheet, so you have a better look then at your areas. So in the kit then you can use, we have these little windows, and you can kind of decide what size design you wanted. So if you wanted a little design, if you wanted to choose just a little piece, you can do that. Choose which area of design you want. So maybe somewhere like that, Helena?
Yeah, I think that would be
that could
very
work nice.
typically Boris design.
Yeah, and we might get rid of some of this as well in the because we'll keep it quite plain.
Yes.
But you've enough then flow there to do embroidery and do the lace as well.
Yeah.
Perfect. So I'll use the white one, so when we scan it. So we're happy to go with that then for our next
Doesn't matter
design.
if there's a little gap there.
No, it's okay, because once we bring it on, it'll be clear,
Okay.
so it'll just catch the outside of it then. Is that
perfect.
okay? So when we're happy with the design, we're going to bring it over to the scanner, and we're going to scan it in and get it ready to print. For the second step, we've brought our design over to our scanner and our computer, and we're just going to scan in our image. So make sure you have your window covering the area of the design that you don't want to be seen, and we've just focused then in on the area that we want to be scanned. So I'm just going to pop it in. So the main thing is that there's contrast in the image, so you're trying to make your lines as dark as possible, so that it's readable to the printer where it's going to cut out the line. So a clear line, as clear as you can make your lines, the clearer your design will print. So I'm just going to use my mouse to edit it in Illustrator. Once you've clicked your image, up at the top of the screen in Illustrator you have the image trace button. So image trace is allowing me to get rid of the background. All that is left of the image is clear black lines, and that really helps when we go to the printing stage. So I'm saving this file as an SVG file because this is the file format that my vinyl cutter recognises. Okay, and once I am happy with my image, I bring it into the Brother Scan and Cut canvas. So this is the software that works directly with the vinyl cutter. Okay, and the file looks a little bit different when it's in the Brother Scan and Cut canvas because it recognises the outline of the design. So your clear black line is now gone and it's replaced with 2 thinner lines on the outside. It's giving the machine a direction of where to cut out your design. So I'm happy with that. I just have to make sure that the size is right. So I know that my embroidery hoop is 25 centimetres, so I just have to make sure that it's going to fit into my embroidery hoop. So I'm going to edit the dimensions in the side panel. Yeah, and I'm happy with that. So once that's edited, I can send that file directly to the Scan and Cut through wireless internet, or I can put it on a USB flash drive. If you didn't have access to the software, you could directly scan in your drawing into the Scan and Cut. I find that sometimes the cut isn't as clean that way, and I like to go that extra step and edit it on the software on the computer, but either one works. It's just a trial and error. So now we're ready to start the printing process. So I've sent the image to the printer and I have it up here on the small screen. And just before I print, I know the size is right from when I was working on it on the laptop. I just have to make sure that I flip the image so it creates a mirror image when it's printed, and it's printed the right side up then. So that's ready. Press OK. And then what I'm using today this is heat transfer vinyl, and there is a matte side and there is a shiny side. So when you're printing, you just want to make sure that the shiny side is facing down on your Scan and Cut mat. So I'm just going to, it's already tacky, so I don't have to do anything to the mat, and I'm just going to line it up on the edge. And you don't have to worry too much, it doesn't have to be perfect. And just as you go along, just smoothing it out, that there's no air bubbles. And I know that my design is in the center because I can see it on my screen of the mat. So if it doesn't reach the edge, you're fine. And then I'm just going to get my scissors and cut it to the end of the mat. I'm going to load the mat into the machine. Okay. And yeah, it has an option to draw the design or cut it, so we're cutting the design. And it's going to give you how long it's going to take your design to cut, and this one is going to take 6 minutes. So I'm just going to press play. So the cutting is finished. I'm just going to take the mat off the machine. And now I'm going to remove the heat transfer vinyl. So now this process is called weeding. So you're taking away all the excess material from your design. And I'm just going to use a pick. So you can start off with the pick, and then once you've got kind of the main edges off, you can use your fingers. So it'll depend on how detailed your design is, on how much weeding you'll have to do. So you can start to see the design coming through. You can get heat transfer vinyl in any colour, but I've used white just so that it matches the lace. And then it just, if you can peel one of your corners, And that's most of the design cut out. So it's just going back and any little bits that are left over. Yeah, so I'm happy with how that's turned out and it's all weeded. So the next step will be pressing this onto fabric using the heat press. So the first thing is we have to get our fabric ready for printing the vinyl design onto the fabric. So I have cut out a square of cotton fabric. You can use any type of fabric you want, any size you want, it's completely up to you. The vinyl transfer takes lots of different types of fabric, so you're not limited in what fabric you want to use. So as I said, I've gone with a cotton, but the only thing with the cotton is it's a lightweight material, and just for the sake of embroidery and lace, we just want the fabric to be a little bit thicker and a little bit more sturdy to make it easier to stitch in our embroidery hoop. I've chosen an interfacing, and it's just to thicken the fabric and make it easier to embroider and do the lace techniques. So I'm going to go over to my heat press, and just one more thing you need for heat pressing. This is a Teflon sheet, and this just makes sure that it protects your fabric, that if the heat press doesn't get too hot and damage your fabric. So always have a layer of a Teflon sheet or a heat resistant sheet of some kind to protect your fabric. So I'm going to just lift that off. And again, the interfacing has two sides. One is a shiny side, and that's where the glue is, and then the matte side. So you want the matte side on the base of your heat press and the shiny side facing up, so that it can be glued to your fabric. And then I'm just going to put my layer of cotton over the interfacing. And again, don't worry if there's a little bit extra around the edges, because the heat resistant material will make sure that that doesn't fuse to your machine. So I'm just going to put the Teflon sheet, and again, this doesn't take too long, around 30 seconds to a minute. So you just want it at a high temperature to make sure it bonds with your fabric. And you can also check on the back of the heat transfer vinyl that you use. Usually it gives you a guideline for your fabric, what temperature to set it at. If you don't have a heat press at home, you can also just use your regular iron. And again, put a layer of, if you don't have a heat resistant material, you could use baking paper, just something to put between the material and the iron. And that should be ready. Yeah, so I'm happy with that. And again, the nice thing as well is it also presses your fabric and it's ready then for the heat transfer vinyl. So you have no creases in your fabric. Now that that's ready, I'm going to take my design. And again, just make sure before you put it on that if there might be any little bits of vinyl left over, just kind of hold it up to the light maybe and just check. But I'm happy enough with that. I'm going to press it down in the center of my fabric. And I'm going to put the Teflon sheet over. And again, you'd leave this on for a little bit longer just to make sure that they bond together. So around 2 minutes. But again, just check the guidelines with your heat transfer vinyl because they're all a little bit different. So that should be okay. Okay, and then sometimes it doesn't adhere straight away. So just to check to make sure that it has fused, you can just lift the corner of the design and it's peeling away straight away. So that means that it has worked. And then you can just peel off the plastic back. Just to make sure that the design is definitely sealed, I just like to press it one more time without the plastic sheet. So I leave my fabric on the heat press, put back on the Teflon sheet and just press it one time for 30 seconds. And then if there's any little bits that might lift, that they're definitely pressed. And that should be okay. So I'm happy with that, and the next step is to put this design into the embroidery hoop and begin embroidering. So we're back from the heat press with our vinyl print, and now we're going to use our template to decide our design and where to place the embroidery and lace stitches.
I've chosen these sections here, these 3 sections, to do the Borris lace. I think anybody who's working on the pack, they're just learning the stitching technique, so I didn't want the areas to be too large, and also these areas are continuous and they're enclosed. So I think they would work very well.
I think so too, Helena. I've used some really simple embroidery stitching. So this would be the running stitch, the straight stitch and the buttonhole stitch, because we had in mind that people getting back into sewing and stitching mightn't be used to using needlework. So we said kind of a warm-up exercise would be to use some very simple embroidery stitches that they've used before tackling the lace areas, and might give them a bit more confidence before deciding their final lace design. So it's a mix of easy and a little bit more intricate stitching. So we're going to start with our embroidery stitches, and I'm going to start with a really simple stitch, which is the straight stitch, and I'm just going to embroider this section here. So I'm using a white embroidery thread, and then that's really so that it's in keeping with the lace, which is usually always in white. So I'm just starting at this section. And again, it's really simple. It's kind of just to fill up some of the areas, because the lace stitching is quite intricate and takes a lot of time. So the embroidery can just be a decorative stitch to be included in the design. And again, I'm just doing straight lines up and down, but you can do them in zigzag lines, or it can be in any pattern you want. And again, this is kind of just really a warm-up exercise for the stitching of the lace. So I'm just choosing the point where I want my stitch to finish, pulling it through, passing all the way through, and then choosing my next point from underneath the work, and again pulling it through. So I continue that stitching all the way through this section. And here's one that I've done earlier. So as you can see, I've done the straight stitch vertically in this section, but then I've also done it horizontally in this other section. I've also used the running stitch throughout this section here. So really it's personal preference, whichever stitch you would like to try in your design. The lace is really the focal point of the design, and these are just complementary stitches and to get you used to using needlework again. So when you're happy with your embroidery design, it's time to begin laying your lace tape, which Helena will demonstrate now.
So what I am going to do is I'm going to lay the tape out along a section of the design. The tape we use in Borris lace making, it's 100% cotton tape, and it has little holes either side of it, and a 4mm tape is ideal, which I'm using here. This tape is called Trina Rinascimento. I know I'm not saying it like an Italian, but I believe it means Renaissance tape. But unfortunately we don't go to Italy to buy it, but we order it on the internet. I'm going to sew down the tape along this little design here. I'm going to use a sharps needle and just a regular cotton thread. And I put a knot here at the end of my thread to just do a little knot. Okay. Now, I'll find a place on the design that I think would be a good place to start, and I think I'm going to start down here. Now, normally when I'm working on a Borris lace design, because the design is continuous, you finish up where you start, and which I am going to do here, but normally I'd put a little turn upwards to ensure that when I finish up, I'll put a little turn the other way on top of that so that all your edges are sealed. But this piece isn't going to be, it's not a piece that's going to be worn, so it's more for display, and I don't want any bumpy parts in it. So I'm just going to extend the tape a little bit there at the beginning, and then I'll snip off any excess when I get back round there again. So I'm going to start here. I have the knot at the end of my thread, and I come in from the back of the fabric and I'm going to lay the tape along that white line using a small running stitch, just like that. Now, so my next stitch, just a little running stitch, going in through the back and out to the front. Now, as you're going around the curves, it's important that you keep the tape flat. That's especially important when you come around to these more curved pieces. You just want to make sure your tape is securely down, because when you start to work on your infill stitches, you don't want your tape being loose or coming away from the edges of the design. You want your design to be nice and defined. Now, as you work on a curve, it's important to keep the outside part of the tape as flat as possible. Don't worry if it curls up a little bit on the inside like it's doing here, because when you start to work on your infill stitches, you'll be pulling that in. So now I'm nearing the end of this little section, and I'm going to finish by doing a turn under, so it will just hide any joint there, so it will look like a continuous design. So I'm going to just snip the tape there, just enough to allow me to do a little turn underneath. So I'll get my tape, I turn it under, okay, just like that, and then continue down to the end. And I'm just going to bring it in to the back and do a little double stitch to ensure that it's secure. And then, just to finish the piece, make it nice and neat, I'm going to snip off this little tail so that you can't see it. So that's the tape laid, and the next part is going to be filling this little section with a decorative infill stitch, and the stitch I'm going to use is called fine net. And the reason I'm choosing fine net is that it forms the basis of many of the other Borris lace infill stitches. And I think once you've mastered fine net, really you're able to make Borris lace, because it's about getting the tension right, and once you've learned that on the fine net, you can bring that into the other stitches. So for the infill stitches, I'm using a cotton thread. It's Madeira Katona number 30, and it's mercerized, and that allows the thread to slide nicely as you're working. I've changed my sharps needle now for a ballpoint needle or a tapestry needle. As you can see, the tape has little holes, and you work into those holes when you're doing your infill stitches. So I'm going to start here on the right hand side towards the top of my curve, and I'm going to weave the thread down between those holes on the tape, 2 or 3 holes, and okay, and I'm just going to secure that with a back stitch. I'm going to over sew around the top of the curve here to my starting place on the left hand side. And by over sew I mean you work into the holes of the tape, just like that, then over the top and into the hole, the next hole. Okay, and I think I'm in the right position now to start my first row. So my thread is on the left hand side. I bring it across to the right and insert the needle into the tape on the right hand side, and I bring it down under my base thread. So from now on I'm going to refer to this horizontal thread as the base thread and the rest of the thread as my working thread. So I bring it down under the base thread, pull it downwards, and I'm just going to hold that in position with my thumbs. The first stitch is very important because if that is loose, then the tension on your base thread is weak all the way across and your lace becomes saggy. So I'm holding that tension on my base thread with my thumb here. So it has to be taut. So I'm going to now insert the needle into the tape, into the hole in the tape here at a point above the first stitch, and I'm bringing it down over the base thread to the right of my working thread. So I pull it downwards, and to complete my stitch I'm going to bring the needle under the base thread to the left of the working thread. So that's my first stitch. I'm going to demonstrate the next stitch. So throw the thread to the left and insert the needle at a point above the next stitch, bringing it down over the base thread to the right of the working thread. Pull it downwards. Don't pull too tight, you just have to pull until your vertical is straight. And then I bring the needle under the base thread to the left of the working thread. So when I bring the needle under the base thread to the left of the working thread, we call that a whip. And that whip on the horizontal thread there gives a twist on the vertical thread, and that's what makes the stitch. It gives strength to your stitching. So that's my first row complete. Now I'm going to over sew along into the holes on the left hand side to the position of the next row. So yeah, I think that's about okay. So once again, I bring my thread across to the right and insert the needle into the hole in the tape on the right hand side, bringing it down under the base thread. So this time I'm working into the holes in the row above. The last time I was working into the tape, but now I'm working into my stitching. So throw my thread to the left, and remember the first stitch is very important because that sets up the tension for your row. So insert the needle into the hole above, or into the stitch above, bringing it down over the base thread to the right of the working thread, and then finish the stitch by going under the base thread with a whip. Now it's important to remember that there are sections on your design that narrow or that widen. So you'll have to decrease or increase. You decrease by skipping the first stitch, the last stitch, or in some cases both, but you have to judge that by eye. You never skip a stitch in the center of a row. And you increase by making 2 stitches into the first stitch, 2 stitches into the last stitch, or both. So I'm going to continue this section in fine net stitch, and then in my other sections I'm going to do variations of fine net. As you can see in this section here, I've introduced spacing with the fine net. And so for my first row, I've done a row of fine net stitches. Now for the second row, I did 3 fine net stitches, and I made a space here where the last 3 stitches are. And you make that space by whipping on the base thread for each stitch. So I did 3 whips here on the base thread, that leaves a space, and then I worked into the tape on the left. Over sewed down to the next row and did a row of fine net. So for my next row, I'm going to demonstrate how to make a space, and this time I'm going to make the space on the right hand side. For fine net with spaces, you generally alternate between the left and the right hand side, and sometimes if it's a very wide area, you'll do some spaces in between. So I'm going to over sew down to the position of my next row, bring the thread across to the right and insert it into the tape, bringing it down under the base thread. And I'm going to miss the first 3 stitches on the right. So I do that by doing 3 whips on the base thread. 1, 2, 3. So then I'm going to work into the 4th stitch. So 1, 2, 3, and I'm working into this stitch, just doing the regular fine net stitch. So I've created a space here on the right hand side. So I'll work on over to the end of the row. I mentioned earlier that sometimes you might have to decrease a stitch to ensure that it visually looks right and the stitches don't get too crowded on the row. So I think I can leave out this last stitch. So I'm just going to do an extra whip there and work into the tape. And I'm going to over sew down to the next row, which is going to be a row of fine net. So you're alternating between the row of fine net and then the row with the space on the right or the left, then another row of fine net and with a space on the opposite side. So I'm going to continue this fine net with spaces down to the end of this curved section here, and I think I'd like to do a different stitch here, maybe picot bars, just for a bit of variation. But I'm going to leave that for now, and I'm going to move on to show you another stitch that is based on the fine net stitch, and that's fine net with woven blocks. So I've done 2 rows. The first row is a row of plain fine net, and then the second row I've left a space here in the center, and I make that space by missing the center stitch and doing an extra whip on the base thread. So anytime you miss a stitch in the center, for the purpose of your design, you do an extra whip on the base thread. So for my next row, I'm going to create a woven block in this space I've created in the center of the row. So I over sew down to the position of the next row. So I insert the needle into the tape on the right, as with fine net, and I'm going to work over to here and create a woven block in the center stitch. Now, when I create a block, a woven block has to have a space above, below, to the right and to the left. So I'm going to create a space here to the right of my woven block. And I do that by doing an extra whip on the base thread. And now I'm going to work 4 fine net stitches into this space. There's 1, 2, keeping them close together. For my next row, I'm going to create a block in this space and in this space. And I must remember to create a space to the right and to the left of each of those blocks. So I'm going to create a block here, but remember I have to make a space to the right, to the left of it, above and below. So as you can see, if I take the example of this block, I have my block here. It has a space above, a space below, a space to the right and a space to the left. So it's going to be the same with all my blocks as I work down this space.
So here is the finished piece. We've used the embroidery stitching, we've done the running stitch, the straight stitch and then the buttonhole stitch.
And here's the fine net stitch, and here fine net with spaces all the way down to the end of the curve, and there's some picot bars here. And then this section has been filled with a fine net with woven blocks. And I can't resist putting an edging on everything, so I've done a point de Venise edging around the 3 sections, and in Borris lace we call that knotted edge. So hopefully someday you'll come and visit Borris and try your hand at a piece of Borris lace.
We hope you've gotten some inspiration from this video that you can apply to your own craft. Thank you.
Thank you.